SEN fans, let's talk. Let's do it. Let's actually hash this thing out. And for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, in the past couple weeks or so, I've been getting some friendly reminders from the Sentinel fans that I might be a Sentinels hater or a TenZ hater for just some various things that I have done over the past couple weeks. Let's go through them. The first perceived slight I think that the SEN fans might bring up is that I put them 5th in my initial power rankings of Americas. Now, I was wrong, and I'm happy to admit that I was wrong, as I often am in a lot of these power ranking videos, and that was just another blunder by me. The second thing that I think annoyed SEN fans, though, was quite a weird one. And that's when I made a video about Loud, disrespecting Loud, and somehow the SEN fans were very irate about this, and the reason seems to be that in that video that I made about Loud versus Sentinels, I didn't focus on Sentinels enough and how good they were on that map of Lotus. And the reason for that is actually very simple, because Sentinels played a pretty standard Lotus. They do a couple things that is kind of somewhat unique to them and that they do pretty well, but for the most part, it's a standard Lotus, and they're playing against a team who was not playing a standard Lotus, and so for me, it was pretty obvious that I was going to focus on the team that was not playing a standard Lotus, and in my mind, got destroyed because of that. But Sentinels fans were not happy with that, but I'll tell you this right now. If the 1995 Chicago Bulls was playing against Loud on that map, I would still be focusing on Loud and how they played the map. The third one is a bit more fair because I didn't put TenZ in my top 10 players for Masters Madrid, and TenZ definitely has a decent argument to be in the top 10, and I'm not doubting that whatsoever. Now, if you do look at my list, I think it's pretty clear to tell that I'm still somewhat waiting what happened last year as well, in terms of some of the names you might see on the list, like Forsaken and Chichu and something all the way up 4th. You know, I'm still clearly waiting some of those things that happened last year, and obviously for TenZ, that's kind of bringing him down if you do the list with that in mind. And so that's most likely why I left TenZ off the list, but it's a completely fair argument. If you do think that TenZ should be on the list, that's also fine. And then the final thing that I said is that Sentinels don't have the best map pool, and I got some pushback from this as well, and it even came up on Plat Chat.
There's an argument going around. I think it was TMV was saying that he thinks that Sentinels map pool isn't that good, and I can understand why he comes from this point of view, because they played Split and Sunset in the majority of their games, and it's 2 of their best maps. So I can understand this, and also in the best of 5, it went the distance, but I think with that argument, you don't consider the rest of the playing field. And that's that almost every team has been set back by the Sky nerfs, and almost every team doesn't have fleshed out maps right now.
And that's an argument that's come at me from multiple different people as well, that no one else has a good map pool either, which is fine if you think that, and we'll get into that a little bit, but that's fine if you think it, but that's a completely different argument, right? That might be an argument for why at Masters Madrid SEN have no chance, but I don't believe that. Right? And I can prove that I don't believe that because I made a whole video about power ranking the teams in Masters Madrid, and guess who was at the top of the list? Sentinels! So guess what? Versus the rest of the competition at Masters Madrid, I agree that SEN still should be pretty high up there, if not number 1. And that's the thing, no one that I've really seen has countered the argument that SEN don't have a good map pool by saying something that directly counters that argument and saying, no, I actually believe that their bind is better than you give it credit for because of X, Y, and Z. Or, you know, this map, oh, you don't know about this map. They just need to change this one thing and then it'll be really good, right? No one is saying those kind of things, and that makes sense because apart from on Split, Sunset, and Lotus, on the other 4 maps, they were 2 and 7 during the kickoff event, which is not good. And in fact, the argument that everyone else has a bad map pool as well might not be that true either, to be honest. I mean, if we take Calming Core, for instance, they don't have a losing record on any map that they've played. Their worst is 1-1 on Bind, but on every other map that they've played, and they haven't played on Breeze, but on every other map, they have at least a winning record. And if we take a look at Gen G as well, they have 2 maps where they've been pretty dominant on Icebox and Lotus, where they're 4-1 and 4-0, and 2 maps in Bind and Ascent, where they've also been really, really good with some very high win rates as well when they've played those 2 maps. Now, these are all small sample sizes for all those teams, so it's still, of course, very difficult to truly know what's going on because we're basing it off so few games. But if we take a look at Gen G, for instance, you might be like, well, okay, Sentinels have 3 maps where they're good to great, right? In Sunset, Split, and Lotus. And Gen G, let's say, okay, they have 4 maps where they're good to great, right? What's the big deal of being 4 maps versus 3 maps? But the difference is actually massive. And let me explain why that is such a big deal. Because, for instance, if we take a map veto of, let's say, Sentinels versus Team Heretics, let's just do what it might end up being, right? So Sentinels, they might ban, for instance, Icebox. And Team Heretics, let's say that they do ban Sentinels Split. Sentinels then go, okay, well, we'll pick Sunset then as our next best map. And Team Heretics say, okay, we'll pick a map that you're not so good at. Let's say Breeze. Right? Sentinels then go, okay, well, we're not so great at some of these other maps, so let's just say that we ban Bind. Team Heretics say, okay, we're going to ban your Lotus, and then the final map would then be Ascent. Now, here's the thing. If you're only good at 3 maps, you can always, if you're the opponent, ban Sentinels 2 good maps, and mean that you automatically guarantee that you will play on 2 maps that Sentinels have not proven to be that good at. Whereas, if you are good at 4 maps instead, you can always guarantee that 2 of the maps will be maps that you are good at just for the way that the map veto works. So that's why there is such a big difference of being good at 4 maps versus only 3. But fear not, Sentinels fans, because if we go historically, this shouldn't be that big of an issue for Sentinels, because there's one thing working big time in Sentinels' favor, and that's that the pro teams are really bad at map vetoes. And you can kind of prove this if we go back to last year as well. You may remember that last year, Fnatic were really good at Lotus, and at one point they had a 12 win streak on the map. And you might be asking yourself, why did teams not ban the best team in the world at the time? Why did they not ban their best map? Especially after they'd won maybe 6, maybe 7, maybe 8 in a row without many of those maps being close? Why the hell weren't teams banning that map against them and letting Fnatic keep picking Lotus, and Fnatic were basically starting 1-0 up? There's other examples from last year as well, like EG on Fracture during Masters Tokyo. Foot banned it in their first game because that was Foot's permaban, but after that, every other team decided to let EG play Fracture until the grand final when Fnatic had 2 map bans. And EG stomped everyone on Fracture during that tournament, and I don't know what these teams were thinking, because you've maybe got like 1 day of prep to prep against a team that, just by the eye test, and you can tell pretty clearly, is very, very good at Fracture, and so essentially EG were just starting 1-0 up in all of those games. And I know some of you are probably thinking, well, hold on, TMV, these teams have permabans, and they don't want to risk playing a map that they just have put no preparation into. That would be stupid, right? But the thing is, that isn't the best argument either, because when we've seen teams be forced to play their permabans, it actually hasn't gone that bad. For instance, let's take the Masters Tokyo Grand Final, where Fnatic had 2 map bans, and so EG were forced to play their permaban of Bind, and they played a Reyna Chamber comp with Boostio playing Reyna. And you know what the closest map was in the Grand Final? Yeah, it was their permaban of Bind, which went to overtime. And there's other examples as well. Let's take Optic versus Loud in the Masters Reykjavik Grand Final. Optic at the time were permabanning Breeze. Guess who won that map in the Masters Reykjavik Final? Oh yes, it was Optic, the team that permabanned the map. But if we're going back to Sentinels map pool, some of you might be saying, well, I think you're being a little harsh on their icebox, because they've only shown icebox 1 time, and it was a close loss to Loud 13-11 in the Grand Final. And so you might be thinking, well, actually, I don't think their icebox is that bad. They've only shown it once, and it was a close loss to a good team. The problem with that argument is I don't think that Sentinels are that confident in their icebox anyway, and you can prove that because they first or second ban icebox in every single one of their games before the grand final. And when I went back and watched that icebox, I wasn't really impressed with either team, to be honest. I don't think that Loud are world beaters on icebox either. And maybe that's just because it was coming off the back of the Sunset and the Split, where Sentinels looked incredible, and then you've got this kind of messy map, so maybe it looks even worse in comparison coming off the back of those 2 other maps. But I do think that it's pretty clear that Sentinels don't have a ton of belief in their own icebox, and looking at the footage that we saw, I don't think that either team really that great on it. But really, I think you can perhaps prove this best with just a simple question by flipping it on its head, which is, why aren't Sentinels the overwhelming favorite to win Masters Madrid? Now, some of you diehard SEN fans will think that they are the overwhelming favorite, but I think the general consensus is that this is a pretty wide open tournament that, potentially pretty much anyone can win. So why aren't Sentinels the clear overwhelming favorite? Well, it's clearly not to do with individual player talent, because Zekrom was #1 on the combined Plat Chat rankings list, and TenZ, according to everyone, should be apparently on everyone's top 10 list as well. So it's definitely not individual talent. It can't be due to the team's talent, because They've won probably what most people would consider the hardest region as well, so it's not to do with that. We've also seen perhaps some of the highest level gameplay just in general from Sentinels, particularly on their split against some good teams like NRG and Loud. And it's not really to do with experience either, because whilst this team as Sentinels hasn't gone to an international tournament together, individually they all have quite a bit of experience. Sassy, of course, has won champs. TenZ has been to multiple internationals and won one. Zekken has been to multiple internationals. Zelsis has been to multiple internationals. It's really only Junk UT who hasn't, who actually, if you think about it, during the Ascension tournament, he traveled to a foreign country and played in a very high-pressure tournament for Ascension last year, so even he probably has some experience of what this will be like. So if it's not the individuals, it's not the team, it's not their ceiling level of play, and it's not their experience, then what is stopping people? What is the doubt in Sentinel's mind? And to me, it's very, very clear. It's the fact that in the 7 games that they played during kickoff, only one of them was a 2-0. Everything else was either a loss or a 2-1 or a 3-2 win in the grand finals. You know why that happened? Because on some of these maps, they haven't proven to be that great. But with that said, all Sentinels need to do, prove to me that they should be the overwhelming favorite, is come out on one of the maps that they haven't shown it thus far against Team Heretics and beat Team Heretics in a clear, confident, secure kind of way. And to me, at that point, Sentinels will be the overwhelming favorite to win Masters Madrid, because you only need 4 maps to be good. As soon as you go from 3 to 4, you're chilling, because then you can always guarantee that we're going to be playing on 2 maps where we are confident that we will win. I hope that cleared some things up for you, Sen City. You'll be happy to know that I have picked them against Team Heretics as well, although maybe some of you will think the TMV curse will come into play. We'll just have to see.